On today's bonus, Locked On Bucks, the weekend edition, Bucks get some revenge against the Indiana Pacers. The defense continues to look much better. Giannis continues to dominate, and the role players are hitting shots for this team. Frank and I dig into all of it coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden, as we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. And also that your favorite podcast is now a newsletter. You can get the all-new free Locked On Bucks newsletter delivered to your inbox daily. Sign up for free now at lockedondaily.com. That is lockedondaily.com. Today's episode brought to you by Robinhood Gold. They provide the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. Generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at robinhood.com/gold. Frank, one of those games where you almost say, well, where do we even start with this? Everything that went right for the Bucks. But, I mean, Giannis is the obvious place to start. His second triple-double of the season. He was in attack mode all night. The Pacers, especially early in this game, were showing some hints of building a wall. We saw them go to zone as well. But there were just no answers for Giannis, who continues his torrid pace through the season.
Yeah, and it's going back throughout the history of this podcast. When we're podcasting on a Friday night, to be clear, folks, no one's forcing us to podcast at near midnight on a Friday night. It's usually because something pretty fun has happened that we say, you know what,
or really
Justin,
bad,
but I don't know. Speak for yourself. I'm not staying up till midnight on a Friday to talk about something terrible. But yeah, we were messaging earlier, and I was like, hey, you and Camille, anybody want a podcast? Camille's feeling a little under the weather. Hopefully she feels better soon. Justin, you were at the game. You did the game. You did post game. Now you're doing post game with me. And last year, with everything that happened with the Pacers, 11 games in a season against one team is crazy, right? Pacers won 8 of them. And so, of course, I think the Bucks acknowledged, that like, yeah, this game, it is a little bit different, right? It does, I think, mean a little bit more. And I think what we saw from Giannis tonight, got a fast start. I think he had 13 in the first quarter, only 2 in the second quarter. But then maybe not a Chicago Bulls third quarter as he had the other night when he had 25 in the third quarter. But, he, again, when the Bucks needed him to either make plays as a passer or as a scorer, he did that time and again, got to the rim, finished, basically made, whether it was Miles Turner or Benedict Mathurin, didn't matter the size of the Pacer. He, was able to make a whole lot of guys look very small. And, it's just, again, one of those nights where you just look at the box score and you just say, all right, let's say thank you, basketball gods, for giving us a decade and counting of Giannis Antetokounmpo in Milwaukee, because what this guy does is unlike anything we've seen in Milwaukee, unlike, some of the things he does, obviously, like nobody in the history of this sport has done some of the things that he's capable of doing. And, no shortage of highlight plays, but certainly that fourth quarter play where, he recovers to get the huge block on, I think it was Mathurin at the rim, and then go the other way. Gary Trent, who had another, probably his best, I think it was his best scoring game as a Buck, could have taken him for a layup. Instead, he does what the crowd wanted him to do, which is throw it off the backboard for a Giannis alley-oop finish, which I think that came right after they had the lead cut to 6, and it was 108-102, and they came back and Trent hit a big 3 to make a 111-102, and then Giannis makes that big defensive play, which, again, talk about defensive playmaking. We've seen a few of those this year, Justin, and this is another addition to that highlight reel in terms of making big plays, turning defense into offense. And that was to me the kind of the most fun kind of play in this game. It got I think as Doc called it, a bit showtime at the Apollo for 5 minutes. He said maybe about 10 minutes in that second half, where the Bucks got pretty careless and let the Pacers get back into it. But yeah, would it have been more satisfying if the Bucks win by 20, 25 points? They led by 25 in the third quarter. Maybe, but on some level, I think there's also positive in, it happens in the NBA in 2024, especially against a team like the Pacers, who can turn you over, who can run up and down, score quickly. You're going to see leads evaporate. And I think honestly, for a team like this that has had its struggles, like, there's also value in kind of being tested. And, if they somehow lost this game, I mean, it would have been an absolute disaster, but they buckled down and they made shots and they made plays on both ends, and they were able to win this game, pretty comfortably in the end. So I'll allow it and stay perfect in NBA Cup play, get a little bit of revenge against a Pacer team that obviously has been struggling, but came into this game with the same record as the Bucks. So, I think losing this game would have felt like a double, triple loss, and winning it, maybe not a double win, but certainly it is a really important game to get a result in and sort of continue that kind of forward momentum. So yes, a very happy Friday night for Bucks fans. And obviously it all started with Giannis.
Yeah, and that part, I think, was one of the more important parts and changes that we've seen during this run. And look, one of the things that I tried to really get across on the post game too, I don't want to be a downer about it. Like, there are going to be stretches where the Bucks lose 5 in a row again, or 4 in a row, something like that. You need to dig yourself out of the hole, but it's not everything's fixed, and it's great. Like, we need to prep ourselves for that, but this is important to see for this group. The part that you mentioned too, of you had a 25-point lead, you looked and holy cow, it's a 2-possession game. That to me was the biggest change. And the defense is the big reason for it. Is, in the past, we've seen the Bucks start to lose hold of the rope and it's just gone, where a 14-point lead is all of a sudden a 12-point deficit in a couple of minutes. So at least taking baby steps. I know Doc Rivers is going to have a lot to point to. Like, we got to clean this up. We still have some of those runs. And as you mentioned, he talked about the frustration of, it did seem like the Bucks were having, if this is a bad thing, too much fun at that point with the Ajax behind the back stuff. That's when it started to come down a bit. But it was important that they dug in and didn't give up that lead. I think this is their first it has to be their first wire-to-wire win of the season. So taking some of those steps was important, but the defense is just what continues to stand out the most to me. Is, we had the conversation previously of, is this their identity? Doc talked about trying to find the identity. Are we moving closer towards believing that the identity is, once again, this is a defensive team, but the difference is you have more half-court scorers that you trust and a closer in Damian Lillard? Because it's starting to be a growing sample size that I think they're 8th defensively since November 1st. They've played pretty good teams. And tonight, I know the Pacers are struggling offensively. But tonight it was like they flipped the script. They were the team that was doing everything the Pacers did to them a season ago. They were pushing the pace. They were pressuring them. Even Andre Jackson Jr. getting the 8-second violation on TJ McConnell, of all people. That was something TJ McConnell did to the Bucks last year. So as Doc continued to preach, the offense and defense are so closely tied together. That's really what we've seen in these 11 games in November.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I think I was looking at some lineup data earlier this year, and I think it was friend of the pod, Nathan Marzion, posted some stats, and it was on off with Brooke versus Bobby. And, I was looking at it, I was looking at Giannis by himself, Giannis and Dame, Dame without Giannis, et cetera, looking at kind of those different scenarios, since that's most of the game, right? Most of a game when the Bucks are healthy, either Giannis is going to be on the floor by himself, Dame's going to be on the floor by himself, or they're going to be on the floor together. And they haven't been good in any of those combinations. Yeah. And it's really an offensive problem, right? And so the upside of that is, what was the question about this team? It was, can they defend at a high enough level to, be elite? Because we took for granted that they would be very good offensively, good to great offensively. And we've seen the defense actually get to the point where, oh, this looks like it should be, especially with the younger guys playing. It doesn't feel like last year. It felt like when the defense was playing well, there always was something a bit sort of smoke and mirrors about it. But now it does feel like they actually should be a good defense, shouldn't they? I mean, you've got Dame on the floor, but what are the other weak links that are playing regularly, right? DeLon Wright's playing somewhat regularly as the backup point guard. He's a very good defender. The guards, whether it's Andre Jackson, obviously has been one of the best defensive specialist types guys in the league. When you look at a lot of the advanced metrics, AJ Green, we've been singing his praises. Not just tonight he didn't shoot well, but he earns his minutes with defense now. He plays hard defensively. He stripped the ball from TJ frickin' McConnell.
Yeah.
The AJ versus TJ moment, very special moment for me to see. And Gary Trent Jr., right? I mean, honestly, Gary Trent Jr. is one of the worst guard defenders they have, putting Dame in a separate category. But he's kind of in a lot of ways, the worst defender they have. And if Gary Trent's the worst of the other guards, I'm happy because Gary Trent can still defend at a reasonable level. And then, of course, I mean, obviously Bobby's the one other kind of outlier guy. But, even Bobby, I think of late has not been, it's felt more like previous years, right? Where it's felt like, Brooke and Giannis are going to erase a lot of mistakes. And when Bobby's on the floor, you're obviously not playing, it's not like starters that you're going against typically. So, and let's be clear too, we said at the top, Giannis has really elevated his defensive game. We've been talking about that for the past few weeks. He is back to being an all-defensive caliber guy, which we haven't been able to say, consistently for the last year or two, right? I think his defensive impact had waned a little bit. And of course, Brooke, ageless wonder, right? Just what he's done defensively has been amazing. So I think it's really encouraging that we're starting to see the theory of that defense actually begin to show that it can actually be effective. I mean, tonight, the Pacers scored 117, but you look at with their pace, you deflate it for pace. They were at I think 111 or something like that, which is a below average offensive night in general, below average for any team, not just the Pacers. And especially given what we saw from this team last year and what they were able to do running and just wearing the Bucks out, spreading them out, running pick and roll. You have to be really happy with that. The offensive rebounding actually ended up being 30%, which is kind of probably the one thing that actually was problematic. But the transition stuff, even though the Bucks gave them a bunch of cheap stuff with some bad turnovers in the second half, Bucks actually had a much bigger kind of points added from transition night than Indiana did, which, I don't know how many times we were able to say that last year, but obviously that has not been part of the Bucks identity, right? Beating teams up in the transition game. So I think the defense has been really encouraging. But that said, this offense, it has to look more like the offense we've seen these last couple games, right?
Yeah.
Houston, great defensive team. Bucks didn't look good offensively in that game. But it has to look more like the team that we've been seeing here of late. And on that front, I think the chemistry between Dame and Giannis these last two games, it's been oh, okay, yeah. Those two guys, a lot of side pick and rolls, Giannis kind of rolling into sort of empty side pick and roll, Dame throwing him bounce pass, pocket passes, getting him the ball on the run. And also not just Dame doing that. We always joke about Pat Connaughton being the only other guy that seems to know how to do that. We've actually seen other guys be able to make plays for Giannis in that respect as well. And it just feels like, again, kind of the pace in half court has been better. And obviously tonight also just the shooting was better, right? Oh, amazing how good the offense looks when guys make shots. And that also includes, Dame didn't have a lights out shooting night, but a couple of huge threes in that third quarter run when they turned, roughly a 10-point game into a 20+ lead. Dame hitting a couple of big threes was huge. And it's weird that the one part of Dame's game that seems the most off right now is his three-point shooting. But, his playmaking has been really good. I think his passing, what he's been doing to get Giannis the ball, has been really encouraging. Brooke didn't have a huge night, but had a perfectly solid night. We need this to be kind of like the baseline Brooke
Yeah.
offensive night where he
Yeah.
just gets, teens, like, 13 points or whatever he had reasonably efficiently, and just doesn't miss a lot. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't know exactly kind of like the exact trade-offs, but they have to become a high-powered offense. They have to be a great offense. And if they can start looking like what they did tonight, again, not that the Pacers are a good defense, but they can look more like what they've looked like recently offensively. And then you get Chris Middleton back, hopefully, knock on wood,
Next week, potentially, Doc said.
I don't want to curse anything, but that obviously like kind of can Katie Luxell. I mean, they have no excuse for being as bad as they've been offensively so far this season, right? Just consistently mediocre, no matter what combination of dudes. It's just like they're just always mediocre offensively. They have to start looking more fluid, making shots. And again, Brooke, Gary Trent, those guys finding their legs has been really important. Dame, his playmaking has been really good. And of course, Giannis is just the metronome of this, right? Just every night being an incredible scorer, playmaker. And this team is just so fun to watch when guys are making shots. Bobby Portis, I think had all of his points in the first half, but he had 17 points, hit that runner at the end of the first quarter, which was a big momentum play. So this team is just so much more. The energy is just totally different when guys are making shots off Giannis passes, right? It just kind of opens up the whole game. And obviously we just didn't see nearly enough of that kind of in the first part of the season, but now it feels like, again, there's a bit of a change in the tide. And yeah, just again, as you said, like you're still under 500. You're still a long way from being in the conversation with the Celtics, Cavs, and I'd say Knicks as well.
The Knicks, yeah.
So
even the Magic at this point.
Yeah. So the good news is like you're not that far from a top 4 seed, but the reality is like, good job, high five, fun game tonight. I think everybody had a great time that got to be there, but work to do. And it continues Saturday against the Hornets. If you lose that game, all of a sudden, the good vibes are muted pretty quickly. But you're going to have losses against teams you think you can beat. It happened when the Bucks won 58 games, 60 games. It's certainly going to happen this year, but again, like the margin of error, you just want to make sure that it's not an effort thing. And that was the thing, I think, in the first 6 minutes. I couldn't believe how much, because there were times where the Bucks were like showing help and even doubling, and they were recovering. It's just like, did the Bucks have an extra guy on the floor? How are they not like getting just gashed, when they are bringing this extra help? It was really impressive, the first quarter of that game defensively. And, obviously they got the offense going when they needed it.
Yeah. I mean, the first, 3 minutes, especially and Doc Rivers said before the game, it was funny that Rick Carlisle and Doc were both asked about not only this being an NBA Cup game, but the 11 games played against each other last year. And, is there any added motivation, especially how chippy it was and everything that went down? And Doc Rivers said, yeah, I think there is. Like, I won't speak for the locker room, but I get that sense. And Rick Carlisle didn't want to touch it and just, the crowd is always great here and it's always a tough place to play. So I don't really think there's going to be any difference, but you could see from the start, this definitely meant something to the Bucks. And I know Dame said after the game too, it's one game, but we wanted to show them last year's not this year. We are a different team, and what happened last year is not what you can expect to happen again this year. Two of the things that you mentioned, I do want to spend a little more time on offensively and defensively. The big notion too that you mentioned, the Bucks, how this defense is starting to climb. I think it's one very obvious thing that you addressed earlier. So we'll get into that conversation coming up next year on Locked On Bucks. Well, you can now join the millions of members that are working towards their financial progress with Chime. They help you make progress with fee-free overdraft protection up to $200. Get spotted on debit card purchases and cash withdrawals. No monthly fees or maintenance fees either. And they offer over 50,000 fee-free ATMs. To date, Chime has spotted members over $30 billion. Friends give friends a boost, as eligible members can get complimentary boosts to temporarily increase a friend's Spot Me limit. When you give a boost, they can boost you back temporarily to raise your limit. To get this working for you, set up a direct deposit in your Chime account. After a qualifying direct deposit of $200 or more, Chime will notify you to enroll in Spot Me. With an activated debit card, Chime will spot you up to $200 when you exceed your balance. Your next direct deposit is applied to your negative balance, and Chime never charges fees or interest for using Spot Me. So make your fall finances a little greener by working towards your financial goals with Chime. Open your account in 2 minutes at chime.com/NBA. That is chime.com/NBA. Chime feels like progress. Banking services and debit card provided by the Bank Corp NA or Stride Bank NA, members FDIC. Spot Me eligibility requirements and overdraft limits apply. Boosts are available to eligible Chime members enrolled in Spot Me and are subject to monthly limits. Terms and conditions apply. Go to chime.com/disclosures for details. All right, so I think just to start with the defense, there's less to unpack that you kind of already addressed, Frank, but minimizing the damage and like limiting your liabilities is the big thing for this group that has kind of sparked this turnaround. We talked before the season, not only with the 3 veteran minimum signings that they made and how, these are all upgrades over the guys that they're replacing. And anybody that was on the fence about Gary Trent Jr., you're finally starting to see it now with those shots going down. You should have already seen it defensively. I remember talking with somebody at the arena a couple of games ago that said, and this was somebody from another team covering another team. That was like, I don't know. Are we sure this isn't at least a wash? Like, yes, I think we're pretty sure this is not a wash. We've never had, I know it's a small sample size of games, but we haven't had any of those moments yet with Gary Trent Jr. where it looks like the controller came unplugged. Like, he's active. He's ripping the ball out of there. He was active tonight as well. And now he's starting to hit some shots. But last year, up and down the roster, you think about Brook Lopez and how he was out of position. Everybody points to Drew Holiday, but it's not just Drew. I mean, I know as we've seen now, the time has kind of passed for him, but you had Drew Holiday, you had Wesley Matthews,
Javon Carter. Grayson Allen was a better defender than he was fine as a defensive player. He just didn't have the size. And the Bucks of old, you always had help at the nail. You had Giannis and Brook back there. You wiped all of that out and did things differently. It took some time to adjust. And then you sprinkled in a lot of liabilities where you were looking at any given moment, sometimes 60% of your guys on the floor where this is a guy that we can attack here. And as you said, I mean, if it's to the point where Damian Lillard is the only weak spot, the Bucks aren't the only team that has one defensive liability that's on the floor at times. That's a majority of the teams that are out there. So you can get by with that. And we've seen active hands from Damian Lillard and Gary Trent Jr. and the likes of those players. So that's a big piece of it. Obviously, Giannis returning to form defensively and becoming more of a playmaker is another huge part. But before the season, we talked too about Greg Buckner coming over and looking back at some of those Cavs teams. Like, I don't know, do the Bucks have the personnel to do this? If the roster makes more sense, it's not solely Greg Buckner, but the Cavs were a pretty good elite defense those 4 years that he was running things for them. And, I know it's not as simple as like for like here, but there's similarities with how Brook plays versus Jared Allen, Giannis versus Evan Mobley. And while you could certainly make a strong case the Cavs have better perimeter defenders than the Bucks certainly last year did, I don't think anybody would look at the Cavs roster and say, man, these are elite perimeter defenders. So that was my optimism of why can't they be at the very least 12th, somewhere around there. And I think that's a big piece of what we're starting to see is let's get back to taking away some of the easy things. I know, so far the Bucks have been one of the best in protecting the rim and an opponent's field goal percentage there in the top 10. They've been very good in mid-range too, which has been a very, very big pain point for them. It's just
3-pointers have kind of become an issue, but that's even started to cool it a bit recently.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a shot chart perspective, I think the main thing you'd look at right now is just they are allowing just a notably higher percentage, just like essentially like squeezing, like mid-range shots have been sort of converted into
Layups and yeah.
the toothpaste tube problem, right? You've kind of squeezed some of that toothpaste into from mid-range into 3-pointers, and obviously the math is not going to like that. So yeah, we'll see how much they can kind of address that. If that's something that maybe can turn around a little bit. I saw someone tweet that the Bucks have the worst opponent free throw percentage, or the highest opponent free throw percentage in the league, or something like that, coming into these games. Like the average is like 77 and they're at like 83% or something like that. So obviously free throw defense, not really a thing that you can do much about. Yes, you can not foul good free throw shooters, but I think historically that's not really typically a thing that doesn't work itself out. So, hopefully you can do a little bit better job of reducing those 3-point looks, funneling people at Giannis and Brooke. I think we can all live with that. And then, yeah, I mean, maybe you can get a little more luck from the foul line. And the defensive rebounding, I mean, we've had a couple games recently. It had gotten much better after some early season issues, really starting with the night in Philly, right? Philly had a bunch of them. It had gotten better. There have been a couple games recently that weren't great. But again, like that's an area I think I have some confidence, as much as they've at times felt like they sort of stand around and like let kind of fast teams like just out hustle them to the ball. They haven't been terrible, right? They came in the night 10th in defensive rebound rate. They can get better. I think they can get better there. So I think there's still upside, defensively. But I think the other thing too is, you mentioned, Malik and look, I'm always a little wary of picking on Malik Beasley too much, because I mean, I think he mostly tried.
He was miscast.
It wasn't like it wasn't an effort thing. But I think honestly, it's not just Gary Trent either. The fact that, I mean, last year, I mean, it was kind of like one of those like running jokes about how like Malik had, the secure starting job on the team. Times it felt like, he just started every game really, right? And then I think end of the year it finally changed a little bit, but when Pat Bev got inserted as starting 5, but I think just the fact that like in a weird way, I think Gary struggling and losing the starting job, I think has given has given Doc a chance to try some different things. And we've seen Ryan Rollins start. Obviously, some of that was more like due to Dame's absence, but we've seen AJ Green start. We've seen now Andre start. It seems like Andre is going to start. And then the question is, does the offense kind of become an issue that he can't necessarily play a heavier minute load tonight? Obviously, they wanted him out there a fair bit to slow down Halliburton and kind of gum up the Pacer offense. But I think, it's not just you're swapping Malik for Gary Trent. It's that you're also swapping, some of those minutes, Pat, who's now a couple of games now hasn't played at all. And I think Pat has lost something from I don't think Pat's like a terrible defender, but I think his lateral movement has gotten worse, right? I think he's one of the guys that I think when you look at it, why were they giving up dribble penetration? Like I think Pat just has a hard time, especially on switches against smaller guys, like just keeping up. So I think, the net swap of AJ Green, Andre Jackson, Gary Trent for the likes of, Malik Beasley. And I mean, remember Campaign played a lot last year too. So this year you've got, DeLon Wright, Ryan Rollins, AJ Green, Andre Jackson, Gary Trent. Like I'm just rattling off a bunch of dudes that defensively are as good or better than, anybody that was playing, especially those 2 guard minutes last year. So, and I mean, in principle, it should work better.
Yeah, and Jay Crowder was really your only option against bigger wings, and Torian Prince has been a market upgrade over him. I mean, I know Lakers fans are quick to point out too, like, hey, you won't like him, but he's probably playing more than he should right now just because Chris Middleton
Yeah.
isn't there. But I mean, it's still been a huge upgrade over what you had out there in the past.
Yeah, and I'm always like with Torian, it's a little funny, right? And what a weird like 4-game stretch he's had, right? He had 23 points on 14 shots in Charlotte in the loss, huge plays to give them a chance to win that game. Then he goes 2 games without making a shot, scored 2 points in 2 straight games. I don't know how many shots he missed across those 2 games, but maybe it was 0 for 10 or 11 or whatever it was. And then tonight he doesn't miss a shot, right? Scores 13 points, 14 points, whatever it was. Doesn't miss a shot. So yeah, I mean, maybe not the most consistent offensive player in the world, but on net, right? The shooting percentages, like you would take those any day of the week from Torian. And I think defensively, I get nervous watching him like have to navigate screens and like play far out on the perimeter just because he isn't a super quick guy laterally. But honestly, part of that too is because comparing him to Andre or even AJ, right? Those guys are they just move their feet better, right? They're smaller guys, they're lighter guys, they can move their feet better. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, I think what Torian does have is he's a strong guy, and so I think you see it like on switches and things like that. He's not a guy that's going to get like, when there's a switch and a center gets switched on or something like that. He can hold up. Like he's not a guy that's just like, oh, throw it in the post and it's an easy bucket. So I think from like a defensive glue perspective, I do think he's a useful guy to have. And offensively, I think all these guys, it just feels like they're kind of starting to figure out, especially how to play with Giannis. And again, I always kind of come back to who can run a pick and roll with Giannis, and it's usually like the dribble handoff kind of side pick and roll thing where Giannis kind of dribbles to the sideline, hands it off, immediately sets the screen, and then rolls. And I'm not saying it's easy to just, oh yeah, why can't you just throw Giannis an alley-oop every play? Look, defenses adjust and they're very aware of what Giannis is trying to do, but I think the precision from Dame in particular on those plays has been great. These last few games, the level of connectivity that he's had with Giannis, I think has been really awesome to see. Tonight that alley-oop, that one-handed alley-oop that he threw off a pick and roll, that wasn't the side pick and roll, that was more of a kind of middle pick and roll, but that was great to see. And then, they were able to go to that side pick and roll repeatedly, including his last bucket, when they were kind of trying to really put the game away. Again, right side, Dame Giannis pick and roll, slips the pass to Giannis, and he goes right at Miles Turner. And again, it's like we just take for granted that Giannis can just find ways to finish past these like massive shot blockers, but he's Giannis. That's what he does. So it just feels like that unlocks the offense in a ways, and just guys shooting better, obviously. But it just feels like there's just better connectivity, and even Bobby and Brooke. I think both those guys last year showed a bit more of a willingness to pass and try to make plays. You always worry a little bit because look, they're not great at that stuff. So you don't want them kind of getting out of their skis a little bit. But I do think, thinking of like Brooke and the way that he's kind of working with Dame and, dribble handoffs, pick and roll, dump off pass to Brooke, nothing there. Okay, put the ball on the floor, give it right back to Dame, set another screen, flip it, right? Like just keep the defense having to move. Eventually you're going to create an advantage somewhere. And I think, we've seen examples where I think Bobby had like 6 assists a couple games ago, which was that a career high, So, I think just more, I think the unselfishness has been good, encouraging to see. And there was I think it was coming out of, I can't remember in what scenario. There was a play midway through the fourth when it was getting close, and they went into this thing where Giannis was like, it was like 4 guys, like basically all 4 player. Dame was, like 35 feet from the basket, and like all 4 other players were basically like pushed down towards the baseline. And it was just like, guys, what are we doing here? Like, and then finally, like AJ Green came up and set a screen. I don't know if that was the play that Gary Trent hit the 3 on, but it was just like infuriating. It was like, guys, no, this is not playing with pace. Like, play with pace in the half court, move, set screens, do stuff, right? Like, don't just like have static plays where it's just Giannis or Dame trying to go 1v1 the entire time. So, for the most part, though, much improved. And as you said too, like taking quick shots. Like, again, you don't love in principle taking like kind of early clock shots all the time, but we saw that repeatedly. Like, it was really a dose of the Pacers' own medicine. Like Bobby, Gary Trent, like Dame was throwing hit aheads, and it wasn't always for layups, but like guys were getting kind of early open looks. And, again, I know you like to work for a good shot and all that, but if the alternative is sometimes kind of like painful, grinded out types of offense in the half court, like, yeah, play with some more pace. If it means taking some early shots, I think that's okay.
Yeah, and they did just enough, I think, but there was one really good thing about their offense tonight that stood out, and one thing that still needs some work. I think you probably know what that one thing is, so we'll get into that conversation and wrap up this weekend edition of Locked On Bucks after this. Time to talk to you about our friends over at Game Time. You've heard us mention Game Time before, using them as the #1 ticketing service app there is. It makes it so easy to get your tickets for any event, not just sports, concert, comedy, theater, you name it. Game Time is the app to get it. You can toggle in the all-in pricing feature to show the upfront cost with no surprise fees at checkout. See a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy those tickets. And the lowest price is guaranteed, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Best of all, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that code LOCKEDONNBA. NBA, $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So the good, obviously, Giannis and Dame, that they continue to look better and better together in those two-man sets. We finally, Frank, it took 8 years, but we finally found somebody other than Chris Middleton and Pat Connaughton that can throw lobs to Giannis. So we have that to look forward to. And it was another one of those games where, Damian Lillard didn't have a shot. That's one thing it's been there for about the last 5 games that we still haven't seen him start to connect. He did hit 2 threes tonight, but largely the percentages haven't been there. But he's still
was he 3 of 8 maybe? I know he hit 2 in that in succession in the third quarter.
Yeah,
I thought he maybe had one did he have one in the first half as well, maybe?
That sounds right. But the weird thing with him, let's see, he was 3 of 8. Is, even through some of the shooting struggles, and tonight wasn't awful. He was 8 of 19, 3 of 8 on threes. But even on nights when he's had like a 1 for 8 and those types of nights, you still look up and you say, Dame got the 24 points tonight, huh? Wow. And that's one of the important parts when we talk about just finding ways to score and closing games. He still has that burst and is able to get into the paint. And we've seen the decision-making, what Doc Rivers has really preached, of the importance of getting there, touching the paint, finding guys. Either make them react to you so you have a wide open shooter, or if it's Giannis especially, make them have to make that choice of, do we give up the layup or dunk, or do we give up a shot? And that's something that I think both he and Giannis have really started to excel at these past few games. But just the chemistry between the two of them, 5 or so games ago, beyond that, but earlier in the season, you started to see a difference in the intensity and the screens that Giannis was setting, that became notable. And now you're starting to see that chemistry between the two of them. The one thing that still stands out for the bad, and it is the thing that's going to prevent him from playing extended minutes in games, is, Doc has been very candid about it too. When teams start to help off of Ajax, that's when we got to go to AJ Green or other players. And we've seen him really living in the dunker spot. There's still not a whole lot of comfort there. And there was a number of plays tonight where he is immediately looking to get rid of the ball when he's right there. And there's one play that stood out to me specifically where Giannis was like 2 feet away from him. and he immediately gives the ball up to Giannis, where you could tell Giannis is like, what do you want me to do, dude? Like, our spacing is cooked right now, that we're both right here. So that's the thing that you just are going to have to monitor. We need to see, I don't know if it's comfort or what, but you got to find some of that progress in order to keep feeding those minutes to Andre.
Yeah, I mean, and I give Doc credit. Like, people always want to complain about rotations. Like, there's always a subset of the fan base that is like livid about rotations and just cannot believe why the coach is playing the guys that are getting played, or, it's like focused on two guys or whatever it might be. So let's acknowledge right now, right? I mean, look, I've obviously, seen value in Pat when many people have been ready to kick him to the curb.
I want to say real quick, and I think this is probably what you're going to get to as well, but I think Pat has had like 3 or 4 pretty good games this season. The problem is what you mentioned before. Like, the athleticism just isn't what it was years ago. He still has the instincts. He still is one of the only guys that can cut and create some of those opportunities off the ball, but the athleticism just isn't there.
Yeah, the defensive quickness is a problem, given that you have all these other guys who are just better at it, right?
Yeah.
And just do a much better job kind of containing the ball. But Pat made huge plays at the end of that Charlotte game, right? I mean, I thought he was like cooked, and then he hits a huge three. He gets a defensive stop on LaMelo, scores a terrific running layup out of a side pick and roll action with Giannis. That could have been the game-winning shot. He was huge to end that game. And then what happens? He hasn't played since. Very interesting that Doc had the confidence to go back to him to close that game. He repays that with big plays, and then he doesn't play, which, again, like, I think when you look at the rotations, like, what are people going to complain about, right? I mean, at this point, it's like some people are still complaining about Bobby Portis playing, which, again, like, I think it kind of is what it is. Like, I don't know that you can play a whole lot smaller, especially without Chris, than you are right now. And on a night like this, I mean, Bobby was a plus whatever he was and scored 17 points. Like, he was good tonight, right? And like, I would, at this point, like, I'm just hoping Bobby starts to make shots, which he struggled with this season, rather than sitting around just hoping that he's going to get like benched, which just isn't going to happen. So, but other than that, I mean, who do people want to play? They want to see Ajax play. They want to see AJ Green play. Guess what? AJ Green couldn't shoot tonight. He's had some bad shooting games. He's still playing. Ajax, he's had games where it, as you said, like the Celtics game, like, the game the other night, like, I think it was the Houston game, right, where it's just like, man, it just doesn't look like offensively this is going to work, right, the way the other team is playing him. Okay, so just stop playing him. Like, he's not going to stew on the bench, right? Like, you got other guys that are pretty good. You can put Gary Trent and have him play a lot. You can put in AJ, have him play a lot. So I think we should acknowledge, like, I think Doc is managing his rotation really well right now. And, I got no notes really in the grand scheme of the universe. And, he was playing Ryan Rollins guy. It's like all the jokes about Doc not playing young guys. Ajax is starting. AJ Green's getting all you can eat minutes, even when he's not shooting well. Ryan Rollins had started games prior to his injury, which hopefully is not a season-ending injury. I was joking when there was that big optimism, like, oh, I guess maybe he's out for until March. Now who knows what's going to happen with him? But fortunately, like, again, you never know when guys are going to have their number called again. Now DeLon Wright's playing every game. And I don't know if DeLon's playing like at a super high level, but if you want the identity of this team to be a defensive one, DeLon Wright's a pretty good guy to have out there, given the way that he plays help defense and his versatility on defense too. So, I think rotation wise, like, I mean, I do feel it, like, when they have to break up Giannis and Dame, right, outside of start of the first quarter, end of the second quarter usually, and then start of the third and end of the game, right? Like, it does feel like, man, like, you're just sort of trying to survive at times, given that you just don't have the creation when you have to split those guys up. But again, that's just one more reason why, man, Chris Middleton, please start feeling ready to play basketball again soon, because if he's the Chris that we know and love, like that is going to be such a huge boost to this team offensively. I think it helps the starting group. And maybe Chris doesn't start, which if he's on a minutes limit, I think is fine. I think Chris in general, like if he's going to be playing 30 minutes a game by the playoffs, then like you start him. Like I think it's kind of, don't overthink it. But whether he's playing 20 minutes or 30 minutes, it's just going to be big to have a guy that has his passing ability, shooting ability, playmaking ability on the court, even for 10-minute stretches each half.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start to wrap up here is on the Chris Middleton front. I mean, Doc Rivers, I didn't hear it, obviously, because of the game going on, but apparently Katie George had talked with Doc during the game, and he had indicated it's really close, which stopped me if you've heard that before. But Doc Rivers gave more context today before the game and said, we're pretty hopeful that he's going to be able to play at some point next week. And it's a schedule that's going to lend itself to that, where you have they only play Tuesday, and then you have Thanksgiving, and you get 3 days off in between, and then play the Wizards that Saturday. So reading between the lines, it would seem like a Saturday game to me that maybe Chris could play that game at home, but we'll see that. But at least the chance of, I think it's getting close now, is the most comforting thing of all of it for this Bucks team that is now at 7-9. And again, the record overall in a vacuum, it's disappointing, but what they've been able to do recently is important. Like, you have a chance to get to above 500 as we move into December. I mean, it could be much worse. Look to the east of what's going on with some other teams. So as we said at the start of it, look, it's early. It's way too early to say the season is over in full-blown panic. There were certainly some problematic things that needed to turn around and change. The injection of youth has been a big part of it. This defense finding its footing has been a huge part of it. But again, like, you got time. The East is not particularly good right now. You got time to dig out of this, but you have to be an active participant in your own rescue. And that is what the Bucks have done in these past, as Doc Rivers would say, 6-game win streak, but a 5-1 record since that 2-8 start.
Yeah. 2.5 games out of the Knicks and Magic are third and fourth. They're 9-6 and 10-7. So you're essentially 2.5 games out of the 3 spot or the 4 spot. So again, like, it's right there. Right. And it's just about, going from where they are now to just getting a little bit more consistent offensively, and just making sure that defensively, you kind of continue to bring this level of effort and focus. And I think I was just looking at this month of November, they're 6-5, I think 13th offensively and 9th defensively.
Yeah.
I mean, they're basically have the same defensive rating as the Celtics this month. Right. Yep. So
I think they're 9th or 10th in net rate. Like, they're close to top 10 in all 3 of the important ones.
Yeah. And they haven't played great this month, right? Like, they're still trying to figure some out, and they've obviously played, they've gotten half their games or more against the Cavs and Celtics already out of the way, right? So they played the Knicks in New York as well. So they haven't been, again, just getting fat on the bad teams. They've been winning most of, obviously, their wins. They're pretty much all their wins have come against sub 500 teams. But again, it's kind of hard to beat winning teams in the East because there are so few of them. So hopefully they can graduate to beating good teams. But for now, Charlotte Hornets are 6-9. They are in the 10 spot, right? Like, show you how
that's good in the East.
Yeah, the Nets are 12th. They're 6-10. Pacers 6-10. The Bucks 7-9. So you lose another game here or there, like, you go tumbling down from the 6th spot that the Bucks are in now. So just keep stacking them. That's Justin. I think that's the moral of the story here.
Well, I mean, and the big part is it's all leading up to what we all envisioned, the game a week from Tuesday, just deciding everything in the NBA Cup. Is it the Bucks or the Pistons that are advancing into knockout play? I mean, it's going to come down to that game, because even if you lose to the Heat on Tuesday, you're probably looking at a very good chance of a 3-way tie between you, the Pistons, and the Heat. And then it's going to come down to point differential, which the Bucks are currently the leaders in Group B. So we'll have more clarity on that in the coming week or so. That anything we haven't hit on? Any closing thoughts on this, on the Bucks beating the Pacers as we go past midnight on a Friday?
No, just Bucks don't let us down on Saturday night. That's partly why I wanted a podcast tonight, Justin, because I was thinking, who knows what happens Saturday night.
Yeah.
Let's capture the good vibes, give people something, while you're driving around doing errands or mowing your lawn, or probably not mowing your lawn in Wisconsin, but that's a very Texas thing to say. But yeah, snow blowing, whatever it might be tomorrow, give you some good vibes to hear us blather on about how fun it was to see Giannis and the Bucks at least begin to get some revenge against the Heat or the Pacers and kind of keep the good vibes going. So we survived. TJ McConnell
survived for now. And I was gonna throw shade too at the NBA for how do you bump this game for Warriors Pelicans when no one is healthy in New Orleans? Number one, it ruined our reunion with Kane Pittman, who was going to be covering that game, and then abruptly had to change plans and fly to New Orleans instead. But then that game ended up being a pretty good game.
I was texting with Kane. I said, man, they had you not come home, your adopted home of Milwaukee, to see, the G League Pelicans play tonight. And Kane was like, yeah, Steph's a draw. And then I texted him. I was like, Johnny Furphy getting first half minutes over here. You're missing out. Your Australian with a bad haircut is getting run here. Kane could have been in the building for it, but hopefully we'll see Kane. I got to see Kane recently, but hopefully we'll see Kane. Hopefully we'll see Kane in Milwaukee at some point in the not so distant future.
Let's hope. That will do it for today's show, though. Tonight's show, to the morning show, as the Bucks beat the Pacers finally in Milwaukee. For Frank, I'm Justin. We will talk to you guys once again next week on Locked On Bucks.